What's up, guys, and welcome back to Emerald and Lilywhite, episode 2, the official podcast of Seattle Spurs. I'm your host, Max Marchand, and I'm here with my co-host, Scott Bird. How's it going, Scott?
Going well, Max. Nice little Sunday. It's still getting used to not having Spurs on the weekend, right? But lots of other football to watch. But yeah, good to be here and good to chat with you.
Yeah, so before we get started, we're launching a YouTube channel where our podcasts should be with a video, and then Emerald and Lilywhite on Spotify, where you can find our first episode, on Twitter at and Lilywhite, Emerald underscore Lilywhite on Instagram, and then you can find the Seattle Spurs at the Wits End Bar in Seattle and Cascades Bar in Puyallup. So check us out there if you are in the Seattle area. And
Yep.
then Seattle Spurs on Facebook and Twitter as well. So,
Yeah, real quick, Max. I'll piggyback on both of those things on the YouTube. Definitely get out there and subscribe, guys. We're going to be putting all of our pods, like Max said, the videos that we record, while we're recording the podcast will be up on YouTube, and eventually we'll go live too on YouTube, right? Once we build up a bit more of a following and the brand, expands from a podcast perspective, we'll go live and we'll be happy to share all of that with you guys. And then, yeah, like Max said, our two bars up on the north side. You've got the Wits End, and we've been there for the decade that we've been an organization, a wonderful group there. And down on the south side, like Max said, in Puyallup, we've got Cascades, and they have been wonderful to work with. A newer partnership for us within the last couple of years, and they've absolutely blown the roof off the place with the quality of services they provide. So make sure you check out those two spots. Again, the Wits End up north in Seattle and Cascades down in Puyallup. We'd love to have you.
yeah, I've been to both, and they're both awesome experiences. So, yeah, let's just get right into it. The headlining news, I guess, as this week there hasn't been like much developing besides just some initial links, as like the Premier League window isn't officially open until next week. Obviously, clubs can still get deals done beforehand, but Spurs aren't exactly known as the quickest actor. So I've heard a lot about Conor Gallagher. It sounds like Chelsea want him in the 40 to 50 mil range of price, and he has been linked as well as Villa's top target. So, Scott, what do you think about competing with Villa for Gallagher? Do you think he would pick one or the other? Yeah.
Yeah, honestly, first of all, I think Gallagher would be an excellent signing for us. I think he can play as an 8. He can phase into a 10 when required, right? And I think somebody who can play the 8 and the 10 effectively is important for an Ange system. So yeah, I'd love to have him. I think that the competition we're reportedly going to face with Villa for his signature is interesting. On one hand, he's a Chelsea boy through and through, and we're Spurs, right? So that has to be considered. There's there's another side to look at this with regards to Villa, and yes, they've had a great season, and yes, they've got something going there, but they'll never be able to compete with the longevity of Tottenham and what we're building. I think, and I could be dead wrong. I hope we don't look back a decade from now and I'm eating crow, right? But I don't see Villa having, again, the longevity the Spurs will have when it comes to being able to offer opportunities to compete at the highest level and win things, right? And no disrespect to Villa, they've obviously secured more points than we have, and that can't be taken lightly. But we're in the early days of something pretty special at Spurs, and so I think that could potentially tip the scales back towards a club who's been Gallagher's rival for quite some time. And then you also have to consider money and what we'll offer from a wage perspective. I think as fans, it's sometimes easy to forget that this is a profession for these guys, right? And I'm certainly not taking a job that's going to pay me 50 grand less per week than another job, right? So why would we expect any of these guys to? And money will factor in. But we'll see. I'd love to have him.
Yeah, I think he'd be a great signing as well. For me, 50 million is pretty expensive for him, but I guess that's just the state of the market now. But I look like last summer, Liverpool got McAllister for like 40 million, and like I would take that in a heartbeat. I don't know what happened there to make him drop, because I know he was like a highly touted player on Brighton and for Argentina, but I think it's just the homegrown thing, the English tax. Gallagher is going to be a bit more expensive, but if we're serious, we should definitely go for it, because some of the other links in the midfield that have been coming out in recent days haven't been the best, in my
Yeah,
opinion.
no, you bring up a good point. It's a hefty price tag. I don't think Spurs would ever pay that for him. I think what will factor in is whether or not Villa is willing to negotiate earlier in the window. Because if I could predict the future, I would feel very confidently in saying uh, that if we sign Gallagher, it's on the 30th, which is their last day within this window that they have to sell players within to stay adherent to financial fair play. Or I don't even understand how that it works anymore, and it doesn't seem to have a rhyme or reason, right? But what I do understand is the 30th is the last day. So I think if we sign him, it's because Levy bids 20-25 million on the 30th and says, you know, take what you're going to get from Spurs, or you know, maybe breach financial fair play. Choice is yours. And that only can happen if Villa hasn't paid 35-40 million for him before that happens, right? So that's how I'd see this actually shaking out.
All right, yeah. So, other big news on the transfer front. Um, this is a very optimistic shout, but Julian Alvarez is supposedly leaving Man City this summer. City want around 70 to 80 million for him. And he fits Spurs absolutely perfectly for this window. So, any thoughts on Julian Alvarez um, potentially coming to Spurs?
I will say yes, emphatically is the answer to that question. And all jokes aside, you, I'd be comfortable moving on people that I've grown quite accustomed to and have an affinity for over the years, right? To land a Julian Alvarez, you do everything possible to bring in that player, and not only because of his ability, but because of the way that he fits into a system that is crying out for his profile, right? So not only is he very talented, but he very well may be the most talented player in the position that we desperately need. Um, so yeah, you break the bank for that guy. And interestingly enough, we're going to move a lot of guys on, and I know some of these guys aren't going to draw a big fee, but they'll draw some sort of a fee. And we also consider that their wages will no longer be on the books, right? Which does factor in almost as much as a transfer fee until you start talking about a big enough fee, right? But we're going to have money to spend. I really truly believe that. So we'll see.
Yeah, I completely agree, and obviously he can play the 10, he can play like a false 9, and he can play the wing, and those are all positions that we absolutely need, and we know he's electric on the ball, which is something that we've been lacking. And if it takes selling Kulusevski to get him, then I would do that in a heartbeat. Um,
Yep. Yep.
However, I do think that Emerson, it looks like he's gonna get, I don't know, we're gonna get around 20 million, maybe a little less for him. I think we could get around that price for Hoybier as well. And hopefully maybe one or two others could get a little bit, and that's almost half the price of Alvarez, and maybe we could consider it. But obviously would love to have him on Spurs. And yeah, so we can lead into the next topic, which is Emerson Royale. So he looks like AC Milan are willing to pay the 20 million is the last report I saw, but of course it's Daniel Levy and he's haggling for a bit more. For me personally, I'm taking that 20 mil any day. You?
Yeah, absolutely. I think first of all, I like Emerson a lot. I think he's somebody that fits right into that mold of a Spurs player who doesn't do quite enough but works his ass off for the badge. And I respect that type of profile, right? There's certainly better soccer players than I'll ever be. So yeah, a lot of respect for Emerson. I think he needs to go not only for the club's sake but for his own sake, right? He's a talented footballer who should look at guys like Lo Celso and a few others and say, I can't let that happen to my career, right? I can't just fall off a cliff here at Spurs. I need to play. So to consider that he'll end up at AC Milan, which honestly is one of the more storied clubs across Europe. I'd say top five most decorated and storied clubs that you'll find across Europe, right? Certainly more decorated than Spurs. And I'll wish him all the best. And I think $20 million is, like you said, a fantastic fee, especially considering that we're going to have to bring in a good handful of talent this summer to keep the project moving.
Yeah, and then similar to that, Højbjerg, some rumors out, but nothing concrete. It sounds very similar to me as last summer, where we're hearing like, oh, Højbjerg could go, but it's nothing really ever set in stone. Not one club focusing in on him as a target. So, do you think that'll happen, or will that be like something for the later in the window?
I think it'll happen. I think it needs to happen too. I think he's been awesome this season. I know he's made a lot of mistakes, but he I think I think he was the second highest in our team in terms of appearances in the Premier League, which is like a mind blowing statistic. But he came off the bench as a sub like almost every game, right? When you look back, so he served the club valiantly this season. I don't think he ticks the boxes required to really excel in an Ange Postecoglou system, but I think he's a hell of a footballer. And with the reports that Antonio Conte and Napoli are sniffing around his services, I think that'd be a really good fit. Conte loved him. And I think he'd be a very good Serie A midfielder with his profile. So I think it'll happen. I hope it does, and I wish him the best as well.
Yeah, yeah. He's been good for what we paid for him. Definitely.
For sure.
I'm happy with his career here if it does come to an end. So yeah, and then we've got more people coming back on loan. Jed Spence looks to be sold back to Genoa. Um, they're working on that. That seems like all the reports there from that loan. And then a guy I did want to highlight is Troy Parrott. Striker is a position of need for Spurs, obviously, right now. And Troy Parrott in the Eredivisie, 32 matches, 17 goals, 5 assists. He's scored 8 in his last 8, and he just recently scored a stoppage time winner for Ireland. Are you interested in all having Troy Parrott in the first team next year, based on how he's finished the season?
No, I don't think so. Um, Look, I know he's a Tottenham boy, and I would love to see as many academy guys come through up to the first team and make an impact as possible. But I think looking at what we really need next year, we need two prolific goal scorers at Premier League level. If someone said you've got to take a gamble on Parrott, Valise, or Scarlett as the backup, and let me stop for a second and say if that happens, we have a problem as a club, right? But let's say hypothetically, someone said we've got Richarlison and then one of these three guys as the backup goal scorer. It's either Valise or Parrott, but I think Valise may have a higher ceiling. That's a little unfair to say because we haven't seen a ton of him. But I think Parrott, first, I guess no question had an awesome season. I do think that Eredivisie doesn't translate to the Premier League well when it comes to strikers for whatever reason, and that could be some bias here. But I'd probably side with Feliz as a backup striker if I had to select one of those three for next season behind Richarlison, which again hope it doesn't happen. But because of that, I would be perfectly comfortable either moving Parrott on or loaning him out somewhere in the Premier League and see how that goes. Right. I think if you loan him to like a team that's going to be battling relegation or somewhere in that like 17th to 10th historically, right? Then I think it might be a good opportunity for him to show Spurs that he can cut it in the Premier League.
Yeah, for me personally, like if Parrott's not in the squad next year, then he just shouldn't be on the books. Like we should just sell him. And I think that we will sign another striker, but I think we also will like need a third string striker, and I think
Yeah,
one of those younger lads will be in that position. So, like you said, I was going to talk about Scarlett, Valise, and Parrott for that spot. And for me, it's definitely Parrott because he's the oldest of the three. And I'd say he's proven the most in Europe as a goal scorer of the three. Dane Scarlett has, I don't know, he's so young to say that he's been disappointing. I don't know. I don't feel right saying that, but he hasn't impressed me on his loans. And then Valise, he didn't play at all for Sevilla, so maybe that was a little out of its depth. And I would like to see him play in the Premiership this year. So if we do need a third string striker, I would like to see Troy Parrott get at least a good look in the preseason. And then
yeah,
this also leads in to another question about like some younger guys in a position of need. So winger, if we needed like more winger depth, assuming we move on from Hill and Solomon, we sign a winger, but maybe we need one more Europa League, whatever. These are three guys who appeared in the squad last year. Donley, Moore, and Yago Santiago. Not all of them debuted. Santiago didn't make his debut yet, but those are three guys that are in the wide position that could be competing for a spot in the squad. Do you think that any of them will be a part of the team next year, or do you think they will all be out on loan?
great question. I think Donley has the best chance of getting a sniff of the squad next season. And I say that because for me, it's either him or Mikey Moore. I mean, Santiago is a fantastic player, but I think that the first two names have a very, very high ceiling, right? I think I say Donley because I think he's proven everything he needs to prove to be given a chance. The only question for me that still remains with Donley is, can he do it in the Premier League? I I think he's answered every other question, and the only way to find an answer to that question is to play him in the Premier League, right? I think Mikey Moore has also proven himself in droves, but he's just 16 years old and could go on loan somewhere next year. And by the time he's 18 or 19, really be ready to be levels ahead of where Donnelly is at that age, right? If we progress his development quickly. So Mikey Moore has the highest ceiling of all those three, in my opinion, by miles and miles and miles. But I think Donnelly is a really good player, and I think there's a chance he gets an opportunity to compete for a spot in the squad. I'm not saying he'll be there, but he'll compete for one, I think.
Yeah, and that's another thing. Those three, I'll look for them in preseason.
Yeah.
This year, Santiago kind of got outshined. As the academy lads were absolutely flying this year.
Yeah.
But he was the main guy in that squad last year when they did like one of his teams won the PL Cup last year. And he was the best player on the team, and he did make a Premier League squad this year, which was kind of a rarity for some academy boys with Ange. So I'm definitely interested in what he can do this preseason. And I do agree that he might be the worst of the three. For me, Donley has to go on loan because I just think that he doesn't have any first team experience, and neither does Mikey Moore. So I would like to see those guys on loan because, like you said, they're real pieces for the future. While Santiago is like an older, like academy graduate, if he does show me something in the preseason, I would be open to having him in the squad, especially off the bench. I think he fits Ange's system well for like a touchline quick winger like that.
Yeah. No, I think those are really good shots. I do think Donnelly ends up on loan. I do think again that he gets an opportunity to compete, but I think he ends up on loan, which is again the right move. Like you said, I would love to see Donnelly and Mikey Moore on loan to a team that's competing for the championship. I think they're that good at this point. I would love to see him at Burnley. Do I know if Burnley could use their profiles? I have no idea, right? But I'm just thinking of a high octane offense that will compete for the championship next year, and that's going to be a team like that. So I'd love to see both of them competing for the championship. I think League One's below them, and no disrespect to the league, and I don't see a like a mid to low table Premier League club loaning either one of those in right now. I just don't see them being that high on the team's radar yet. I could be wrong, right? But championships bang on, and I really hope that happens for both. And then
Yeah,
also, oh, sorry, I was just gonna say too. I think Tyrese Hall is somebody that will be interesting to keep our eyes on too, right? And you're more the academy guy here than I am, right? For sure. But I've really been impressed with Tyrese Hall as well, and I think he could have a sneaky opportunity to get some looks in the first team next season. But we'll see.
yeah. So I completely agree with you. What you said, like, kind of think of at top of the championship, Oliver skip to Norwich was really
Yeah,
where he
yeah,
he
good
took a
job.
step to be able to be in the first team the following season. So that was a great loan, and I think similar for Donley and Moore because we're talking guys that could be in the England squad in 5 years.
Yeah,
Um, so yeah, so moving on to more guys that I'm really excited for in the preseason. I think the number one player that I'm looking forward to is Lucas Bergvall. So what are your expectations for him? Do you think he'll be involved in the first team immediately? How much game time do you think he'll get? Etc. So yeah.
it's going to be very interesting. I don't think we can expect him to go on loan this season like some of these other young guys we're going to be talking about because you have to have a look at a player before you can determine not so much where they're going to be loaned to, but or sorry, if they're going to be loaned, but where they're going to be loaned to, right? Is also important. You need looks to be able to understand the best option. So he won't go on loan. Um, Therefore, he's going to get opportunities to compete in training. And if he impresses, who knows? I think, as everyone thinks and knows, it's a big jump from where he's at now to the Premier League, right? Um, no doubt, is he mega talented? Yeah, he is mega talented from everything that I've seen, but it's still a big jump. And I also think that because we swept underneath Barcelona's nose and signed him, that adds to the hype a little bit because of a name like Barcelona, right? I think whether it's us that signs him or Barcelona or City or anybody, you still got to make that jump, and no one can ever truly predict the future. But I think he's got a really, really high ceiling, and I do think because he really can't go on loan, he has no choice but to, or we have no choice as a club, but to look at him in training and give him a chance to compete. And I'd love to see somebody come out of nowhere and make an impact next year for Spurs. That'd be amazing.
Yeah, I'm super excited about him. I think he's fantastic. He's like again exactly what we've kind of been missing there, like a little bit of creativity um in the midfield. And I think that he could definitely I want to say that he's like kind of like a Sar-esque like story, like considering like it came from just out of nowhere young midfielder, and I think he could definitely compete for that spot, like the 8 spot where it's like kind of Sar Bentacore. It's a little like a gray area there, even though if he is more attacking, I think that still fits the system. I'd say Sar is more attacking than like the average box to box. So um, I would definitely want to see how he matches up. Obviously, Sar has 2 years of Premier League experience under his belt, so I would hope that he was a little bit better than Bergvall to begin with. But I think Bergvall is a massive talent. I'm really excited about him.
Yeah. Well, I honestly, it's easy to think along, and I'm not saying you are, I'm just thinking out loud. It's easy to think along the lines of the Premier League is a big jump, and I'm thinking along those lines. But I look at a guy like Crevicelia at Napoli, who came out of absolutely nowhere, right, and took everybody by storm. I'm even looking at a Kenan Yildiz at Juve, who again kind of came out of nowhere, right? Nobody knew who he was, and all of a sudden he's a staple in the first team. So it can be done, and I think there's every reason to think that it could happen with this one. It seems like a really, really exciting deal.
Yeah. And then moving on to more academy players and like their futures for next year. These are some guys that I want to see out on loan. I think they've been a big part of like our academy's success recently, but I think they should take the next step forward to first team football. And that's Tyrese Hall, Will Lankshire, Jude Sunsop Bell, George Abbott, and Alfie Dorrington. So, do you have any thoughts on the futures of those guys, their potential slash loan prospects for next season?
Yeah, I mean, well, I already jumped ahead on you're playing here and talked about Hall, right? So you know where I stand with him. I think if he doesn't, if he's not seen as needing to play anywhere around the first team this year, which is what I expect, then I think a championship loan like Donley and Moore is wonderful for him. And I'd love for all those guys to end up on the same team. How cool would that be, right? And you never know, but I think a championship loan is good for him. I think Dorrington as well. I think he's got a very high ceiling. He looks to be a really, really tidy center back. But ultimately, for the whole list, I do think if we can find him a home in the championship, that's fantastic. There's a few guys who maybe end up in League One, a good League One program potentially, but for every single one of them, get them alone and see what happens. Because I think I've said it, in the past, but for me, a loan is only designed for guys that you think could be good enough and you're not quite ready to turn the page over. Um, there are going to be certain guys who, and this is very obvious thing to say, but guys who we just don't don't see them fitting in, or guys who um, end up in a situation where they've impressed enough to get a fee, but just not enough for the club to do anything with, and we just got to move them on quickly, right? But all these guys who we think could be good enough but aren't quite sure just need to get a loan. And and then from that loan they need to come back and be ready to compete, because I don't think we can't use loans as just a way to keep talent on the books without having a spot for them, right? So I think one loan, a real chance to get that experience, and then after that one loan you come back, you compete. If you're not able to compete to a level where you're going to be used, then we need to move them on, right? It needs to be a quicker process, and I think it's a 1 year loan that needs to occur.
Yeah, and I'm thinking examples like Matthew Craig and Harvey White, where they're on loan for a year and they're clearly just not good enough to play for
Yeah.
Spurs, and then they're gone after that. And I think that's what could happen for like Jude, Sunsup Bell, and George Abbott. I think they're a little bit worse than the other guys mentioned, and I would like to see them in League One because I think both of them do have talent and I want to see them succeed. So if they were in League One, then maybe another loan to the championship or something like that. And as for Tyrese Hall, huge talent, obviously went to Australia with them, played brilliantly in that game. Um, I think similarly, a championship loan would do him well. I think that he would have a better shot at the first team if Bergvall was not coming in, because kind of similar profiles there. And then Dorrington, I would love to see something like what Ashley Phillips did this year, just prepping him for the next step, because Phillips, I think, had a successful loan, and I'm excited to see him in the first team this year. And then Will Lankshire, I think, is definitely the like aside from Hall, he's the one that I'm most excited about. PL2 player of the season, 32 goals, scored a brace in the final. And I think he's just a huge talent. He's only 18 still. If we can get him alone, I think he's as good as Scarlett Valise or Parrott. And I think after a year of like senior football, he could step into that role and maybe give those guys some competition.
Dude,
But his yeah.
yeah, sorry, Langsure, I completely agree with you. I think, you know, he's a season away, and I mean the season after next away from, I think, competing for opportunities with the first team. But he's a guy where you bang in 30 plus goals, like you said, at youth level, you've got to get a look at him. But to ask someone to come in at his age, and I'm not saying you are, I'm just talking out loud here, right? To ask someone to come in at his age and be a goal scorer in the Premier League is a very tall ask. It's a tough position. So a championship loan, like you said, would be great for him. And then I'd love to see him, come back after that 1 year loan, like I just talked about, and compete and see if he can maybe be the third striker for the first team. But the only way to ever figure out if he's going to be able to score at a higher level is to get him at a higher level and see if he can score, right? So we'll see.
Yeah, and as much as I've loved the academy being fantastic, over the past couple years, I do want to see these players like hack it at a higher level. So,
Yep.
yeah, love the academy lads. I think we currently have one of the most promising futures in terms of youth in England, so that's really exciting. Possibilities there. So, on a completely different note, let's talk about James Madison being left out of Southgate's 26 for Euro 2024. Do you have any immediate reactions? Happy? Um, yeah.
Yeah. You know, I'll first I'll say I can't fault Southgate because James just he wasn't at his best for the last half of the season, and he came out and said that on his own social channels, right? The same thing I'm saying. Um, Again, like James said, Southgate had the decision to make, and James's form led to Southgate having that decision to make, and a decision was made. So it kind of is what it is. But I really feel for James. I think there's every reason to believe, regardless of his form in the second half of the season, he can go to Germany and make an impact in the key moment. Right? He's a sharp player with a good head on his shoulders. So I would have taken him. Right? But the reports are it came down to James and Eze for that final attacking spot. And I hate saying it as a Spurs fan, but I'd probably have decided on Eze in that situation too. And when I say I'd have taken Madison, I'd find a way to take them both, right? But if you're asking me to choose between Eze and Madison, and I can only pick one, then Eze's on fire and Madison's not, right?
Yep, I'm taking Eze over Madison as well, but a guy that I maybe would leave home, unbiasedly, is like Jared Bowen. I think he kind of has a similar profile to like Anthony Gordon, Saka, like a just a winger. And I think Eze's like versatility is why he's really in the squad over James. But if you could slot Eze into more of that wing role and have James Madison at the 10 area, I think that would be beneficial. But realistically, Madison wasn't going to play very much anyway. So I'm kind of glad that he doesn't have like that cycle of like training, preparing for the next month to play, assuming that England do well in the Euros, which I think they will.
Yeah.
I'm glad that he just gets more time off / at Hotspur Way, prepping for what is going to be a big next season at Tottenham. So I
Yeah, you
don't
make
think
a
it would
really
work.
good point. Yeah, sorry to cut you off. You make a great point because Sonny and Romero are not going to be around this summer. Um, Romero obviously is going to be here, and I can't wait for that.
Yeah,
And Sonny
yeah,
will end up somewhere with South Korea, at home for a bit. I would imagine. If he's not playing football, he'll still be home. So having one of our captains at Hotspur Way, you know, English. He's not going anywhere. When we bring new guys in, which we better, it'll be really nice to have James Madison around to welcome them and get them accustomed to the way that things work on this squad.
yeah, totally. And then piggybacking off of that, guys to watch for from Tottenham at the Euros, which start on Friday. I'm beyond excited to watch neutrally and not be really that stressed at the Euros. Vicario, obviously for Italy, probably not going to play. I know you're the expert on Italian football, so you would say Donnarumma is in over Vic.
I would. I don't think I actually agree with that, but I think that's exactly what will happen. Whole nother conversation for another pod if we want to do it, but I don't think Vicario plays, no.
All right, and then Højbjerg scored in a preseason friendly. Expect him to play for Denmark in the middle of the park alongside Christian Eriksen. Just want to see him do well, so his value is maybe a little bit higher if he has a good tournament. So, yeah.
Yep, agreed.
And then two guys that will play, hopefully, Van de Ven and Dragusin. So anything to watch for those two?
Yeah, I mean, I'm curious with Van de Ven to see if he can make the same impact for his national team that he's made for Spurs this season. I think he, on form, is one of the most exciting center backs in the tournament, right? So I can only imagine it'll be him and Virgil van Dijk paired as the central defense for the Netherlands. I think there's certainly other people who will be competing for minutes, so I wouldn't also be super shocked if he didn't play. I would think it was an egregious decision if he doesn't, right? But um, Mateus Delit will be around, but I think
Ake.
and Ake as well.
And
Good
and
shout.
Ake
So
is left-footed, which is
yeah, for sure. So yeah, it'll be interesting. I would again Virgil van Dijk and Mickey Van de Ven would be my pairing, but I'll be keeping an eye on him because I think if he starts, he has a real opportunity to show the world just how good we know he is. And then Dragushin, I'm watching to see how good he is because I'm not sure that we fully understand yet. I do think he's talented. I think his first couple starts for Spurs were shaky at best, poor at worst, right? But his two appearances at the end of the season, I thought were really solid, and I think he looked good. So I would imagine, you chalk that up to your first two appearances at a new club. At a new club are typically never going to go very well, right? So I think we got a good player on our hands, and I'll be excited to see how he does.
yeah, I'm just happy that Radu's gonna get like consistent minutes against high level competition, even though Romania probably won't have the best tournament. Like just getting those minutes in because he didn't play that much since he arrived. And then for Van de Ven, it's really interesting because I think Koeman is like a bad manager. So I don't know if he's uh, gonna play exactly how I would like it to, but I noticed that he did have him in at left back in one of the friendlies, and I know that's been a point of controversy for Spurs, especially there at the end of the season, trying to get Radu minutes um, and putting VDV at left back, which I personally was like not for. I don't know where you stood on that, but I just want him to develop as a center back. Like he's still young. He's got what it takes, and that is one of the most important positions. So if he does play left back for Netherlands, I think that'll be another interesting wrinkle to watch for, especially with the flexibility of the Spurs squad next year.
Yeah, it'd be really interesting. I didn't catch that he had played at left back in a friendly. That's very interesting. I like you don't have much interest in him playing at left back. I think he did a great job.
He
Um,
did. He did.
I think he was phenomenal. But my stance firmly is always when it comes to the tactics of soccer, never ever move your best player out of their position to compensate for something else. Right? He and Romero. When it comes down to how talented each player is at their respective role, Van and Romero are 1 and 2, and I just don't ever see value. It's the same conversation with people saying, "Can Romero play the six?" Probably, but who's playing at right center back then? Right? It should be Mickey Van de Ven and Romero at center back, and nothing else. I think.
Yeah. So now let's get into some of the links that have been coming in recent days. Looking forward to the window, I've highlighted the positional needs as cam, striker, defenders, and wingers because those are primarily the positions that have been coming in, at least that we've been linked to. So for the cam section, I had Andres Pereira from Fulham. Last year in 37 games, he had 3 goals, 7 assists, and they're projecting 20 million for him. Job Bellingham, one for the future. He played at Sunderland last season, 45 appearances, 7 goals. It sounds like they want 12 million or 12 to like 20 million for him, which is a little bit expensive. And then Mats Weifer from Feyenoord, 5 goals, 3 assists last season, a 7.85 FOT mob rating. Sounds like he's on a more expensive end, like 30 million. And then we all know who Morgan Gibbs White is. He's been fantastic for Forest last season, 5 goals, 10 assists, and he would be in the 40 to 50 million range. So, Scott, do any of those players interest you or concern you in terms of looking at that cam position for guys that aren't Eze, who I know we both would ideally get?
Yeah, I'm not super intrigued in any of them. I think Pereira is interesting because he's still fairly young and could do could do something in the Premier League. I think he's stuck around long enough to be serviceable and did a pretty good job at Fulham, I think. So I'd be okay with us bringing him in. And he's 28 years old, so I shouldn't even say he's young, but I should say he's not young. But I think what I mean, he's still got a couple of years in front of him, right? And you could still argue is like right in his prime. So I think he's serviceable and it would be fine. But if we brought him instead of Eze, I would just feel very disheartened and a little bit irritated with the club, right? So yeah, maybe Bellingham as well. And I say that because of his brother, and not that brothers are always equally talented, but if he's talented, he's certainly going to learn a lot from his brother about the mentality required to be a footballer at the very highest level. And there's a reason that very often the best players throughout history's sons or daughters have gone professional because they're around the game, right? You are the company that you keep, we could say. And so because of that, I think Joe Bellingham would be an interesting signing, and I'd like to see him, in the mix at Spurs. But at the same time, I don't think he comes in and makes an impact on the first team right away. And then does he just get stuck in the cycle of the youth team or doesn't get minutes? Because we really have a habit at this club, and we've gotten away from this because of the way that we've redesigned our scouting department. But we do have a brief history of just ruining careers at Spurs for guys that are on the up. And so, I think we need to consider that. First of all, as a club, but players need to consider that as well when choosing if Spurs are right for them. So,
Yeah. So if I'm looking at this bunch, Pereira, I would be actively mad if he was our only signing in the middle because
yeah,
he's just straight up not better than Lo Celso. So like, what is even the point
sure. Good
of
job.
signing that guy? Job is interesting, but like we talked about before, we got Donley, like Bergvall and Tyrese Hall, like kind of in that area. I know Donley plays a little bit more out wide, but he could play in that area. Do we really need to spend like 10 to 20 million dollars on Joe Bellingham? Like, I feel like if he wasn't related to Jude, we might not be looking at him like that.
Yeah.
And then Weifer is interesting. I think I would want to see like another good season in the Eredivisie. Obviously, with Slot leaving, Feyenoord is probably going to get like an overhaul, especially with how well they've done in the past couple of years. So he's an interesting one to watch, but again, more expensive. And then Morgan Gibbs White is homegrown, but to me, he just seems like a Walmart Eze type
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
me. So I just 100% rather get Eze, although I think he is a good player and he could genuinely play for Spurs. And I think he's also better than Lo Celso. So I think he's a good player and I wouldn't be I would be okay if we got him, but obviously would rather have Eze. So it would be a little disappointing there.
Yeah. Gibbs White is one that I didn't mention earlier. I would be happy with us signing. I think he's a good player, and we can't turn off our noses at guys who have performed in the Premier League. We talk about the age of some of these players, and I really think when you look at our academy, which we've talked about, and even a good chunk of our core, talking Romero, Van de Ven, Udogi, Toro, Sar, these guys are all like, I think the oldest is Romero at 25 years old of everybody that I just listed. So our team is young already, and we need to be signing guys who can come in and make an immediate impact. And for me, that's like typically going to be somebody who's like 24 to 28 years old, right? Somebody who has proven themselves even more so than someone who's proven themselves at 21, 22 years old, because things can change. We've seen that, right? So I want like really established guys to come in this summer to complement the youth that we've already have. We don't need to be signing like young guys at this point. But I'm not saying go sign a 32-year-old, but I think you get my point.
Yeah, yeah, and I completely agree with you. And it's just, I don't know. I love when we sign younger players, but I know that's also not what we need right now because like we spend so much time. Oh, what could these guys be in the future? And then they never even play for Spurs, like Jed Spence or Jack Clark types. So
Yep.
moving
There you
on
go.
to the striker position, I think the striker position right now is the one that's scaring me the most with these links. So what I've heard just on Twitter and such, Brian Brobby, 22 years old from Ajax, he had 18 goals and 8 assists in the Eredivisie last year. They're asking like 35 million for him. Muniz for Fulham, 9 goals, 1 assist in the Premiership, 20 million, and then N Nesri for Sevilla, who is 27. He scored 16 goals and had 2 assists last year for Sevilla, and he would be similarly around 20 million. So are you interested in any of these guys?
Yeah, I am. I'm not super sold on Brobe, if I'm pronouncing that right. I think, and I've got a little clip here that I can show, but I think he tends to score most of his goals getting behind the defense and making runs into the channels, which is great, and that's definitely something that will be important in bits and pieces for Spurs. But we have so much of the ball, and I'm looking for more of a profile that first of all is a true poacher, but is also technical inside the box, right? Can receive the ball in tight spaces and move the ball in tight spaces. So I'm asking for a lot, right? Somebody that can do that and poach. But I'm
Ivan
just a
Tony.
little bit concerned that Brobe could potentially be more of a get behind the defense and run into the channels again, which is good. But when you have 70% of the ball, you're just not getting a ton of opportunities to do that, right? There are a few breaks, but here, let me share my screen and I'll share a little video of Brobe and some of what I'm talking about here. And to the folks listening, another reason to subscribe to the YouTube channel, right? You'll be able to see these videos live as we talk about them, and we'll be posting the recordings on YouTube, right? So you don't have to watch live to get an idea of what we're doing here, but it is a good reason to subscribe to the YouTube. So we'll just go ahead and go through this video. And again, I think some of what you'll see is that now there's a great example of one thing that he could do for us, right? Which is press. He does seem to be quite effective on the press. Again, a great goal here, pressing the goalkeeper actually, or a center back, and winning the ball back and being right there to slot it past the goalkeeper. Again, something that we could use. Here's him getting on the end of the cross too. So another example, I think, of something that he could do for us. But I think we'll start to see some of his goals being get.
Stevie B there.
There is Stevie B. I love that guy. But yeah, so running into the channels again, something I do not want the listener to think that, or the viewer to think that I don't value a striker who can make awesome runs and get on the ends of crosses, right? Because it is important. He's a finisher too. I mean, I'll give him that.
Yeah, so when I look at like these clips, I think a lot of what he does is really similar to Richarlison, and I just don't know if he can do it in the Premier League as well as Richie can because, like you said, we mentioned strikers from the Eredivisie have historically struggled, especially at Spurs. And my kind of hang up with him, although I do think he's a better player overall, so don't get me wrong here. 18 goals, 8 assists. You look at Troy Parrott, who had 17 goals and 5 assists. Um, I don't know, like it's the same league, so that's a little bit concerning on my end.
Yep. No, I'm right there with you on everything. As we're seeing, fairly good in the turn, but I think it all comes back to, like you said, the Eredivisie piece for me. If we're signing somebody from the Eredivisie, I want them um, to absolutely have blown my socks off, right, and absolutely wow me. And I don't think he's quite there. So, yeah,
Yeah. And yeah, like I said before, these strikers, Brobe or Broby, I'm sorry, I don't know how to pronounce that, but he is the one out of those three I'm most interested in. If we signed Muniz or N Nesri, I would be quite disappointed, as neither of them are better than Richarlison, and we kind of wanted to upgrade at that position. So yeah,
yeah. The only thing that is a little bit intriguing to me on Nezre is he does seem to be very technical in the box, right? Kind of one of those boxes that I was asking for the club to tick. Um, Somebody that I think would fit into the system really well. I just, again, like you said, and like we've talked about, I want everybody we bring in to be a massive impact. And maybe the scouting department decides somebody like that is, he's 27 years old and he's got 50 goals for Sevilla. So he's putting the ball in the back of the net. He was instrumental in their last Europa League triumph as well. So I think he's a good striker, and if the data department thinks he can make a real impact, then maybe he can. But it's not quite the star-studded name that I was hoping for at the 10, right? And you've mentioned Richarlison's names a few times. I think Richarlison could score a lot of goals next season, and so if we're bringing somebody in who's going to play in front of Richarlison, again, I think they've got to be a pretty significant name, and I don't think En-Nesyri is quite that. So
yeah, yeah. So moving on to defenders, and actually shockingly, the defending links I've been thrilled about. I think these are definitely the strongest players that we've been linked to. And of course, that's the most Spursy thing ever because our back four is absolutely set in stone for next season.
world class back four.
Yeah. So, yeah, I got Geert Truida from Feyenoord. He's 23, 8 goals, 5 assists, 7.7 match rating last year, 32 million. Trevor Chalobah would be a good homegrown backup. Chelsea obviously only played 13 games last year, but would probably be in the 10 to 15 million range. Hiroki Ito from Stuttgart, another youngster, 26 matches in, 7.1 match rating, 30 million price. And then De Winter from Genoa. I don't know much about this guy, but he's young, 21. He would be around 10 to 12 million. And then Vanderson from Monaco, who I'm also really excited about. 20 matches, 3 goals, 1 assist, 7.37 sofa score rating, and he would cost around 20 million for some right back depth. So, any thoughts on those? I think we got the Gertruida highlights pulled up currently.
We do. To all those watching with us, that is Gertruida. Gertruida. Um, I don't need to go much further than this guy. I'm all in on him. Um, I think that he not only is he extremely strong in the tackle, he's really good on the ball from everything I'm seeing. But what it is more than anything is he really looks to be a Christian Romero profile. I think he offers a lot of similarities and like-minded qualities or likened qualities to Romero. And I think if we can bring in somebody like that to just add to the ability there and have him serve as an understudy to a World Cup winner, I think it'd be a really shrewd signing. And I'll pull this down, and I've got another one to share because the other one that I want to talk about is Trevor Chalobah. I'm very interested in him too. Actually, I think that Chalobah, first of all, has competed in the Premier League, and bear with me as I pulled this up, folks. But he's competed in the Premier League, and he's incredibly versatile. Here's a little clip from a recent match that Chelsea played against Man City. Looks like the visuals are lagging a little bit, so bear with us here. But very versatile player. We'll just kind of watch and talk about him a little bit. I think he can play as a central defensive midfielder. I think he can play as a center back. I think he can even play as a right back if he was asked to. And I think that's the type of versatility that an Ange Postecoglou system is going to call for. I think knowing knowing how much everybody inverts and overlaps and covers for people, right? It's total football in a lot of ways, even though it's not, right? But I think he's somebody that could fit into that system really well. And like I said at the beginning of this rant, he has played in the Premier League consistently for Chelsea and understands what's required.
Yeah, completely agree. And I think all these options are definitely good. And one pattern of them is that a lot of them can play center back as well as outside back for their respective stronger side. And a lot of them are right backs. So that obviously is paired with the departure of Emerson Royale that's seeming pretty imminent. And it also makes me think about the departure of Ben Davies, although there's less left backs on this list. There's definitely a lot of players that are playing center back, and he was kind of in that fourth center back role at the end of that season. So whether they're signing them to be that fourth center back or they think Phillips is that guy, I just wonder how that will pair with Davies' future, as I think this points towards his exit as well.
Yeah, I agree with everything you're saying for sure. And Ben Davies, right? I'm on a first name basis, I guess, with him at this point. But Davies is just one of my favorites. I think Ben has been a servant to the club, and if he leaves, I'll be sad to see him go. But I also understand that he's surplus to requirements, and he's still got a few years of good Premier League football in his future. I think just maybe not at Spurs.
Yep. All right. So, our last department for the Lynx is the wingers, and I only have one, which is slightly concerning, but also maybe it means we're prioritizing Eze. I'd say him and Gallagher have definitely been our top targets thus far in the window, but that is Chris Furich or some. I don't know how to pronounce his last name, but left winger, 26 years old, out of Stuttgart, 34 matches played, 8 goals, 7 assists, 7.46 average rating, and they're asking 28 million for him. So, thoughts on Chris Furich?
Yeah, I don't have a ton of information on him, but of course I have a YouTube video to share, right? So those who are watching along with us can learn. What I do know is he is coming off of a wonderful season statistically, but most importantly, his club had a just incredible season, right? Stuttgart
Top four,
was
yeah.
not expected to do well, and I believe they finished second in the Bundesliga,
Second,
if I'm not
yep, ahead of
mistaken.
Bayern.
Yeah, so we'll take a look at the pacey winger here. He seems to be good and technical in the tight spaces. It seems like Stuttgart had a lot of the ball, right, which I think is something that has to be considered. But and I know you'll jump in with some thoughts here as well. So I'll keep it brief. But again, with Stuttgart, when you look at how talented they were this season, you always have to look at your wide attacking players as factoring into that. So I can only imagine that he's impressed across Germany, and he's clearly impressed our scouting department as well.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I'm definitely interested in him as like more depth. I like how like decisive he is on the ball. It really seems like when he gets it, he knows what he's doing, and I feel like players like Kulu and Werner kind of lack that a little bit. Like they get it and then they try and figure out what to do. Um, and then obviously very techy and quick. So yeah, he would definitely be an exciting one out wide. And obviously we're super open to more signings in that department. But
Yeah, I mean,
yeah,
look at
as
the way in this video. I mean, he's taking defenders on and beating defenders in tight spaces coming off of the wing, right? He's
yep,
receiving the ball in the final third. He's not running behind the defense, which again, I love wingers to be able to do, but we need guys who can break down the defense by taking on the defender in a one-on-one situation. And we're crying out for that. And from this video, and again, this is a highlights video, right? But he seems to be capable of doing that.
Yeah, I think he definitely fits the profile we're looking for. And that's all I got for the links. So I will just close the show here, talking about some players who have left Spurs. So maybe talking about their career, but we have officially announced the departure of Ryan Sessegnon, Japhet Tanganga, Eric Dyer, Ivan Perisic, and imminently Tanguy and Ndombele. I know we discussed him a little bit on last show. So do you have any closing thoughts on those guys as they end their careers here?
Yeah, I think there's some who pull on my heartstrings more than others. Obviously, Tanganga being one of them, Dyer being one of them. I still vividly remember watching Dyer's debut and him scoring against West Ham, and um, I vividly remember getting to training out in Denver, Colorado, which I was fortunate to go to. And the first thing we all noticed was that Dyer was playing as a central defensive midfielder in training. And this was, of course, prior to shortly before we win and almost won the Premier League and got pipped by Leicester. And Dyer was a huge piece of that alongside Dembele before he was unfortunately usurped by Wanyama, which was the right decision, right? But Dyer was very good there. And so I have a lot of great memories of him. I really wish him all the best. And I mean, he fell upwards, right? He
Yeah.
competed in the Champions League semifinal this year. And he's a good center back. He just didn't fit what we were doing. There's a reason that Jose and Conte both had him as one of the first names on the team sheet, right? It's not because he's a slouch. So he'll be a serviceable defender for Bayern, and I wish him the best. With Perisic, I don't know. It was brief. It was cool. It is what it is. And then with Tanguy, I don't know, man. I'm not going to sit here and bash anybody, but what happened? It's a bummer. I had such high hopes for that guy. And when I say what happened, I don't even mean just him. I mean the club. How did we not do a better job of scouting? How did we not realize that this world-class midfielder who was the future of football, that we were able to sign him, and he didn't go to City, and he didn't go to Barcelona, and he didn't go to Real Madrid, and he didn't go to Chelsea. He came to Spurs, right? And those who have followed me and interacted with me for some time will know that one of my favorite things to say is when Spurs sign that type of player, there's a reason the Spurs were able to sign that type of player. And it's not because we're Spurs, right? It's because someone else didn't want him. And that should have told us enough. So it's a bummer. No idea where he's going to end up. It didn't work. And at Galatasaray, they're not interested in his services long term. And once you go Spurs back to Lyon, then to the Turkish league, and you're still surplus to requirements, you don't have a ton of options. I mean, I can't see anywhere in Europe, that's in the top 10 at least. And I'm thinking in places like Portugal, the Netherlands. I don't think any clubs there are going to be interested in him. Maybe teams that are not competing for those titles. Yeah, so I don't know, but I wish him the best. I mean, I'm not here to think ill of anybody. It just didn't work out at Spurs, and from the club perspective, it's a bummer. But I wish him again all the best and hope he figures it out.
Yeah. Yeah, for me, and Ndombele, just disappointing. Perisic, similarly, I think was a pretty unfairly treated by the fans, but was also a bit of a disappointment last year, as the entire season was. Eric Dyer definitely had some good moments, took a lot of stick from the fans that I think maybe wasn't all the way deserved. And obviously he's been great for Bayern. And then Japhet just wasn't good enough, as much as we all wanted him to be, as a Tottenham boy. And then Sessegnon, I think, is the one that I was a big fan of him. And it's just disappointing. Like, his career has just been derailed with injury, and it's kind of like, it's no one's fault. Like, you can't point blame at Spurs because he's shown flashes. You can't really blame him. It's just the nature of the game sometimes. So I hope he does get a revival whether that be in England or elsewhere. So, yeah.
Yeah, yes, I really feel for Seth. Had he not suffered those injuries, like you said, and the long string of them, he would have been a significant part of at least one of the last three setups. And I'm thinking Conte, Mourinho, and now Ange Postecoglou. I think he's a wingback for all intent and purposes, and he would have played a lot, but it's a bummer. So.
Yeah, so that's all we got for episode 2. Scott, do you have anything to plug before we get out of here?
No, yeah, just if anyone interested, you can find me at Scott G Bird on Twitter. I'm on Instagram as well, Scott G Bird. I very rarely use it, so Twitter's my primary method of producing content and sharing my thoughts, which can be you know maybe scary at times, but follow if you'd like. And then again, like Max said earlier in the show, follow us for all things Spurs from the Seattle perspective. We'd certainly appreciate everybody checking out our socials. And like you said at the beginning of the show, we're the official pod of Seattle Spurs. And we love talking Spurs, but we also very much love Seattle Spurs and everything that they've done for us and everybody involved. So show some love to them next season, especially if you're somebody from Seattle who's looking for a Premier League club to put your heart and soul into. The dangerous game being a Spurs fan, but we'd love to have you, and we'd bring you in with open arms, and our Steve, our chairman, will treat you really well. So we'd love to have you at the Wits End or at Cascades if you're down on the south side of the Sound, and again, check us out.
Yep, and then that's just Emerald and Lilywhite on Twitter and Instagram, and then Seattle Spurs on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. And then for me, at Going Limbs on Twitter, Going Limbs podcast. If you are interested in my takes on other sports. But that's all we got for today. So thank you guys for listening, and stay tuned for next week as we will be recording every Sunday. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and rate the podcast. And thank you. Peace.